I wanna live in a land called paradise. I wanna go to the valley of the King. I wanna live in a land called paradise. Wanna see the birds fly and I wanna hear the angels sing the praises of my Lord so far above. As I move poetically with struggle, I fall in love. I look to the left, I look to the right, and all I gaze upon reveals the source of flowers, rainbows, and the dew at dawn. Some see before and some see in and some see after. I let my sight pierce the chains and see the master. I wanna live in a land called paradise. I wanna go to the valley of the King. I wanna live in a land called paradise. Wanna see the birds fly and I wanna hear the angels sing. So many times in my life I ask myself the question, what got me, brought me into all this mess I'm swimming in? But pain is not and neither harm in the pool of bliss. So slap me with your hand or kiss me with your softest kiss. Tell me that you love me or that you don't like me now. Tell me you invite me or that you don't want me around. I won't cry over a world that can't change my life. I'll put my money on what lies ahead in paradise. I wanna live in a land called paradise. I wanna go to the valley of the King. I wanna live in a land called paradise. Wanna see the birds fly and I wanna hear the angels sing. Try to do right and love my wife and trade and pray and talk. I can be anywhere, do anything, and a mind full of God. I'm pleased and good and happy and harmony. Now I realize that I already live in a land called paradise. I wanna live in a land called paradise. I wanna go to the valley of the King. I wanna live in a land called paradise. Wanna see the birds fly and I wanna hear the angels. I wanna live in a land called paradise. I wanna go to the valley of the King. I wanna live in a land called paradise. Wanna see the birds fly and I wanna hear the angels sing. Wanna hear the angels sing. Oh, oh.
Wasn't that touching? You know, I love to show this video because it humanizes Muslims. Most of the media, the things we hear, dehumanizes. That's the very nature of the kind of challenge we face in the church, dealing with our prejudice against the Samaritans. In my conversations with American Muslims, again and again, they say, we are here because we want freedom of religion. This is the land called paradise for them. They really do love the freedom here, not freedom to do all the bad stuff that we do, but they really feel free to worship as they want. And so I think that really depicts in a very powerful way what the majority of American Muslims believe in. There we go. The topic is all Muslims are terrorists and they hate us, and other lies you've been told. Now, when you listen to the media today, from Osama bin Laden to the professor at Harvard, Samuel Huntington, they tell us that we are facing the clash of civilizations. It's Muslims versus the West, Muslims versus Christians. But as Carl said last night, the fact is the majority of people that have been killed in terrorist attacks have been Muslims. It's often Muslim on Muslim. And so it's much more accurate to say it's not a clash of civilizations, it's a clash within civilizations. Muslims themselves are battling just as much as any Westerner. In fact, I remember the first time I was talking to a Muslim about a terrorist attack, and he goes, "Yeah, we got those terrorists." And it was just kind of stunning to hear my Muslim friend sound like Fox News or something. But the reality is, it's not a clash of civilizations. I believe that's totally false in terms of the real data, in terms of what's happening on the ground. It is a clash within civilizations. Another way of looking at it is people say this about Muslims. Islam right now is fighting a battle for the soul of their religion. It's a battle for the soul of Islam. In other words, where are those mainstream Muslims speaking out against terrorism? Have you ever heard that? Have you ever said that? Our website has lots of links to Muslims who have spoken out against terrorism. Later today, you're going to hear about King Abdullah of Jordan, who in 2005 in Washington, D.C., spoke out against terrorism, denounced terrorism in very public format. But I'm more concerned, in some ways, both Carl and I are concerned about the battle for the soul of Christianity. Will we respond to Muslims like Jesus? Will we truly follow Jesus? As one of my Southern Baptist friends said, and they're not known for this kind of orientation, he says, the biggest problem in the world today is not radical Islam, it's nominal Christianity. We in the West must also understand that Christendom has inflicted our share of terrorism around the world. One of the most important things you can learn during this time today regarding Islam is the fact that Islam is radically diverse. I've had the privilege of walking the streets of well over 20 Muslim countries, drinking tea with the poorest of poor. I lived with the poor in Indonesia. Had the privilege of drinking coffee in fine Middle Eastern cuisine with sheikhs, imams, grand muftis. So it's been awesome to span the Muslim world from Mauritania to Malaysia. And walking these streets and having these kind of conversations remind me of the huge diversity. Furthermore, I've had the privilege of leading an organization that was engaged in 50 different Muslim countries. So I get lots of reports about the diversity of Islam. So let me give a quick summary of some of this diversity. There's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Basically, 20% of the Muslim world, 1/5 of humanity, are Muslims. In this 1.5 billion, you have at least 2,000 ethnic groups. And if anyone knows, every ethnic group, every different language and people group express their faith, express their culture, things differently. So you've got this huge block of humanity, 2,000 ethnic groups. You've got secular forms of Islam. You've got the more radical, more religious, the theocratic. There's the two big branches, Sunni Islam, which would be about 85%, Shia Islam or Shiite Islam, about 15%, very much like Protestant Catholic, that kind of a difference in conflict. There are actually 8 legal schools of Islam. So when someone says, Islam teaches this, which Islam? There's such a breadth of diversity. And then, throughout the Muslim world, one of the challenges you face is the challenge of magic, or what is called folk Islam. The fact is, in many countries of the world, they're more concerned about demons, supernatural power. They fear these kind of things. And so, actually, I got my doctorate in magic, so I got to hang out with witch doctors and things like this, and various spirit practitioners. And so when I went to Indonesia, and I was doing my doctoral studies in this area, I started by using the Quran to bridge and explain about Jesus. They didn't know that. So because of their concern for magic and their fear of spirits, I would often begin with, Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. And boy, they would lean forward. They were very interested in that one. So you have such theological diversity, ethnic diversity. You've got this, the Muslims concerned about magic. And then you have Sufi mystics. Anyone know what a Sufi is? The Sufis are the charismatics and the mystics of the Muslim world. They want to encounter the love of God. So they've estimated maybe 50% of the world has been at least influenced by Sufis. Sufis, you could think of them in terms of they're like the Dallas Willards and the Richard Fosters of the Muslim world, very concerned about the spiritual dimension. So when people say, again, this is Islam, we need to ask the question, which Islam? Now, there have been times when I've spoken and someone from a particular Muslim country, often Muslim background believer, and he'll just tell me, no, Islam is not that way, Islam is this way. Here's my answer to those. I would say, you know Islam better in your country than I do. You're right. But I've also have a much broader spectrum of experience and study in Islam. So just because you know a particular manifestation doesn't mean you understand Islam overall. So there's a certain specificity to a Muslim background believer's experience. There's huge diversity. There's like a spectrum. So first of all, you have the secularist, okay, on the one hand. The secularist Muslims, basically, they reject Islam outright. I remember on a short-term mission to Morocco, I was talking with this guy and he says, well, actually, I'm a Marxist. So you'll meet Marxist Muslims. That's the secularist. Then you've got the modernist. Now, the modernist is kind of a West is best approach. They still are kind of cultural Muslims, but they really embrace modernity, Western ways. The traditionalist would be the vast majority. So you have well over 90% of the Muslims of the world are traditionalists in the sense of they're serious about their faith. They're trying to apply it to today's world. Then the fundamentalist, they're kind of like Christian fundamentalists. They want to go back. They're only concerned about living out their faith as it was lived out in the 7th century with Muhammad. And that's not always a positive expression. But terrorists are the ones that we're most concerned about. Maybe less than 1% of the Muslim world would be in this category. A terrorist is like a fundamentalist who embraces violence to impose their view of Islam. So there are times, I was just talking to an imam recently, and he was telling me basically he was pretty fundamentalistic, and we had a good time. But there is a difference between a fundamentalist and a terrorist, and it relates to violence. I would encourage you, if you want to read more, my booklet, Grace and Truth, has a great little summary of Islam, some of the theological similarities and differences to help you grasp this more. I just want to give this broad overview. Now, when the average American thinks of Islam, here's the kind of picture that comes to mind, right? Women are oppressed in Islam, right? Of course, you know it's a trick question. In countries like Afghanistan, absolutely, absolutely. But right next door to Afghanistan is this country, where this woman used to be head of state. And who is this woman? Benazir Bhutto. I've had the privilege of meeting her. Carl probably knew her well, at least back in the day, before she was murdered by, again, there's these violent strains of Islam. So Benazir Bhutto, right next to Afghanistan, was head of state. I lived in Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim country, and they had a female president, Megawati Sukarno. So, are women oppressed in Islam? Here's what Madeleine Albright says in her book. I love this. She says, the countries with the largest number of Muslims, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Turkey, have each elected a female head of government. This is a distinction that neither any Arab state nor the United States can claim. I think here's a good summary of how we look at Muslims today. This is from Colin Chapman. He says this: there's a middle way between naivety and hostility. He says, and here's how we need to address this. We need to be realistic about the real intentions of some Muslims. So when you leave here, you don't say that all Muslims are they're the greatest faith in the world. There are evil Muslims. So there are some Muslims that we need to be very concerned about. Secondly, we need to recognize the diversity among Muslims and relate to them as individuals and groups with openness and honesty. This is in the Grace and Truth for those that are taking notes feverishly. We need to take a firm stand on the issue of human rights, work for the common good of the whole society, demonstrate a fundamental respect for Muslims without agreeing with all of their teaching, and then unapologetically commend the Christian faith through word and deed. I think that is the way forward. We could just stop right here, make this your life statement, and life would be good. But I have a few more minutes, I hope. This comes up again and again. Is Islam a religion of peace? Is it a religion of violence? Well, you don't hear these verses, but there's a great verse that says, there is no compulsion in religion. Let me just read some of the peace verses. Or the nearest in affection to the believers are those who say, we are Christians. So we should be nearest in Muslims, at least many strands of Islam would say, Christians should be nearest in affection. We're the closest. Here's how they're called to live out their outreach. Invite all to the way of the Lord with wisdom and beautiful preaching, and argue with them and argue with them in ways that are the best and most gracious. Of course, here are the ones that we hear. Fighting is prescribed for you. Fight in the cause of God. Those who fight you and slay them. Fight them until there's no more persecution and oppression, and there prevails justice and faith in God. Or, as I believe someone quoted last night, fight and slay the infidels. So you have two strands of teaching in Islam. You have the peaceful verses and you have violent verses. But you know what Jesus said? He says, we need to get the plank out of our eye first. Before we look at others, examine others, and confront others, get the plank, get the log out of our own eye. Is anyone here aware of the fact that Christians have violent texts? Anyone read your Bible? I mean, here, 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he has. And do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep and camel and donkey. Or Psalm 137:9. How blessed will be the ones whose season dashes their little ones against the rock. Doesn't sound like love of enemy, love of neighbor. We have violent texts. So how do we interpret those texts? How do Muslims interpret? Just as Christians have different ways of interpreting. In other words, Christian history is polluted with violence. Constantine, in the 4th century, changed the course of Christianity. He was the one that picked up the sword, wedded the sword with the cross, and ever since, Christianity has been very similar to Islam in terms of violence. And so, just for a little enjoyment, run for your lives. It's the coming of Christianity. That's how certain Muslims would view it in certain times in history, and we would never perceive that. We would see it very differently. Let me just close with a short summary of Jesus and Muhammad. I mentioned that Constantine picked up the sword and wedded the sword with the cross. Both Muhammad and Jesus had the same choice. At one point, I don't know if you realize this, but there were violent movements called the Zealots when Jesus was ministering. And Jesus had the option of violence. Both Muhammad and Jesus had this choice. Muhammad rode in to Mecca with the sword on a stallion to conquer. Jesus rode in to Jerusalem on what? On a donkey to pour out his life, to suffer and die, to fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah that said he came to speak peace to the nations. Let's follow Jesus, the way of humility, suffering love, for the sake of his name. Amen.